Donald Trump is still speaking. He calls this, he's arrived at court in New York City, where he's on trial for fraud, having been accused of inflating the value of his business assets, I should say. He calls this an attempt to hurt him for the election. He calls it a witch hunt, a disgrace. Trump says this should have been brought years ago, but they waited until his campaign, and Trump is calling Washington all corrupt. Shall we listen in for a moment, Sean? Go.
Get it straightened away. So we'll go in and see our rogue judge, and we'll listen to this man. And I think most people get it. People are getting it. I can tell you the voters getting it, because every time they give me a fake indictment, I go up in the polls, and that's never happened before. But this is a disgrace, and you're to go after this attorney general, because she's turning off everybody from coming in. You know, I don't know if you take a look at the outflow of business.
Okay, we're going to walk away from this for a second, because I've got news on Donald Trump. He continues to dominate in the polls. Let's have a look, please. Have we got these polls for us? Okay. He continues to dominate in the polls. Governor DeSantis is now being asked if he would play second fiddle. Would he be the vice president? Would DeSantis be the vice president for Trump? Ashley, you know more about this. What did he say?
Well, he said, forget about it, telling Maria Bartiromo over the weekend that he has advantages over Donald Trump. Watch this.
Governor, if President Trump came to you and said, let's partner up, you be my VP, would you do it?
No, I'm running for president. We need somebody that can serve 2 terms. We need somebody that can win states like Georgia and Arizona, which President Trump cannot do or did not do, even though candidates like McCain and Romney had no problem winning those states. We need somebody who, and I'm the only one running, including Donald Trump.
Well, those comments come in response to Trump's recent jab at the other GOP presidential candidates, saying before the last debate that they were all job candidates, and asking, quote, does anybody see any VP in the group? I don't think so. So that's Donald Trump.
Welcome to the J, to the I, to the double Z, to the L, to the E, Jbizzle show. Today, you gotta see it. It's hot fire. The media, they all over Trump. You see? They like that money, see? They Trump's whores. You better believe they gonna be all over him like a paid prostitute, baby. You better believe that's what you see on your TVs and computer screens. If you don't believe that for real, you need to wake up. I said, wake up. Wake up. Time to wake up. And if you missed episode 1, you need to go back, you see, and watch that. Then you need to go, well, first you should really go back and watch Jordan Baumgartner's show, and then add the Jbizzle show and watch about the 16th Amendment, yo, because that really gives you an understanding of what's going on, bro, in this country. So, and that kind of tells you what we need to do, bro, to fix the country for show. How you like that? This and that. Like this. Okay, guys, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve Act, okay? What happened in American history to cause the Federal Reserve to come about? And you remember what I was talking about earlier about if you can control the currency of the country, I care not who makes the laws, okay? So that's what we're going to jump into right here.
Hey guys, welcome to Hip Use History. We're going to hit you up with a little bit of the Federal Reserve System today, how exciting it is to dive into monetary policy. I'm not really going to dive, I'm just going to ice skate right across it. But you've watched 15 conspiracy videos and you finally found the one you need for your test right now. So why don't we go giddy up for the run and go see if we can't grow our brains 10 times its size. Let's go get her done right now. All right, guys, the Owen Glass Act or the Currency Bill or the Federal Reserve Act was signed by Woodrow Wilson in December of 1913. But we want to backtrack a little bit before we explain, maybe in the next section, exactly how the Federal Reserve System works. But basically, prior to 1913, we did have a couple episodes early in the Republic with a national banking system, but it was a much weaker national banking system, and eventually those charters ran out. So by the end of the 19th century, you really have a private banking system, which is in a sense kept to the whims of the economic cycles of capitalism, the booms and the busts. So in a sense, before 1913, there was no national money. Banks would give their own banknotes out, which were generally recognized, but not always across state lines. But the bigger problem was when these banks ran into trouble, when everybody would demand their money because there was a panic. People would bring their banknotes in for gold or silver. Eventually, the bank, would run out of Momo. And this isn't good for the confidence of the consumers. So in 1907, there was a banking crisis, which was so bad, eventually the bigger banks had to come in and kind of bail everybody out. So at that point, the federal government created what was called the National Monetary Commission, which was set with coming up with some ideas about how we could create a more stable system. At the heart of the matter is the federal government, and there's going to be people that disagree that this is the federal government's job, but really doing something to stabilize the economy, to be able to control inflation, to control unemployment, to set long-term economic growth, but still have it under a private umbrella. 1913 is a huge year. We're going to get tariffs dramatically reduced. And because they were dramatically reduced by the Woodrow Wilson administration, there was a need to gain revenue from somewhere else. So we're going to take your money, Richie Rich, and we get the 16th Amendment, which was passed in 1913 as well. So this is a year of economic regulation, and the federal government's now going to come in and try to regulate the banking system with the Federal Reserve Act. You can call it the Currency Act. You can call it the Owen Glass Act. I really don't care. But now let's break it up like a Kit Kat bar and look at kind of the three main segments of the Federal Reserve Act, which create the Federal Reserve System, which creates monetary policy in the United States of America right now. So let's do it. Yeah. So I guess the best way to explain in a few words what these Federal Reserve banks are going to do when they're going to create 12 regional Federal Reserve banks, which are going to kind of control the monetary policy through the board of directors. But basically, they're the banker's bank. Like, you can't go to the Federal Reserve Bank and go, "Can I see a teller? I'd like to talk to a teller." Well, you can't. But the key is, and I guess this is kind of the quasi-mix between socialism and capitalism, is that the banks themselves, these Federal Reserve banks, and all banks deal with the Federal Reserve banks. Some banks are special, they get special privileges, they're called national banks, but everybody's got to get their money from the Federal Reserve Bank. And these Federal Reserve banks are owned by bankers. So bankers buy stock in the Federal Reserve Bank, even though the profit goes to the United States government. But the bigger idea is that these stockholders elect the president of the Federal Reserve Bank. But these Federal Reserve banks are completely in the private sector. They're owned by bankers, like we previously mentioned. But they're...
Did you hear that? Guys, the stockholders elect. Do you understand that? The stockholders elect the person in charge. That don't sound too good to me. And so, what needs to happen in this system, no, we do not need the Federal Reserve to be closed down. That is not the answer. The answer is a more democratic question. How can we balance the power? Like President James Madison, when he was talking about how can we balance the power between the legislative, judicial, and the executive branch. Well, what needs to happen here is the states need to have an official called like a state monetary regulator, okay? And you elect this person, and they have whatever 2, 3, 2, 4, 6, or whatever year terms while they're in there. And these people, regulate and kind of, say they're doing this and that's not right. Well, okay, so that way that you have someone who represents you in this and not just the stockholders' interest, okay? But also, there needs to be something um, like for the federal part of the government. Um, I think they already have that. It's called like the governor's board, but I'm not, and the president elects them, so that could be used for that. But the states need the power to say, hey, this, that, and the other with the monetary policy. That will make a big difference on the impact of how our national debt is, and how we spend money, and it gives the states more power back. The people in the states, they need more power back. The federal government has too much power, and the Federal Reserve has too much power.
They're regulated and they're controlled by the Board of Governors. The Board of Governors consists of 7 individuals, although there's only been 5 on there for quite a while, that are appointed by the president. These are the government representatives in a sense. They serve 14-year terms, so they're very buffered by the length of term they're in from any type of outside influence. And one of those 7, which is nominated by the president, becomes the chairman of the Federal Reserve, and that person serves a 4-year term in that position, which is renewable. But these are the ones with real power. And again, we're going to say this 5 times because it's on the test. They regulate the monetary supply, right? They're going to make sure, or try their best, that we don't have deflation, we don't have inflation, we have healthy employment, and we have a sustainable economy over the long run, although there's people that would disagree that they have served that mission well. But
And you see there, that person has too much power, and it only has 5 people that look at them, right? And those 5 people are elected by the president, okay? That's why I'm saying, from a state standpoint, there needs to be a state official from each and every state that also looks at these people to make sure there isn't corruption going on, because they control, so they have, that position is so powerful that if it isn't regulated and controlled, they can tell their buddies what they're going to do with the currency, and insider trading can be going on, and all kinds of nasty stuff where corruption really, the love of money and that root of evil is in there. So it must be regulated and watched, and the people need to have a representative in there to make sure that that is not happening and that there isn't misuse. You know, kind of like an IRS for the Federal Reserve, but they don't tax them or whatever. You know, they just kind of look at them and make sure that there's no corruption. You know, and they go through. You know, they have to submit their paperwork and everything they're doing to these people who the state officials would elect. That is an answer for this.
either way, there's a few ways that they regulate interest rates. Number one, since all banks have to come to them, they're able to charge an interest to those banks. And by adjusting that interest rate, they're controlling, in a sense, what those banks are going to charge you, the consumer. This is called the discount rate. The discount rate that these banks are going to get. So let's say the discount rate is 5%. That means when the bank lends you money, it's going to be more than 5%. So what the Fed can do is control that discount rate. So if there is inflation, if there's too much money out in the system, then they can raise the interest rate, the discount rate, and then banks are going to raise that rate on you, the consumer, which is going to slow spending, slow down, don't spend so much money. But if the economy is very slow, they can lower that discount rate. That'll flood the money with new loans, with new housing, and that'll stimulate economic growth. So in a sense, they're...
Okay, and do you see that when they do these things like that, the people who are the most wealthy are going to benefit more, of course, because it is capitalism. We do not want a communist society, okay? So we don't want that. But that's what I'm saying is this is a very powerful position, guys. And the states should have an official that, and there should be a body of government specifically for this so that it is a more democratic monetary policy instead of a monarchy, type deal where you got these five to seven people the president elects, and then you got this person here that the president elects also. Do you see what I'm saying? The states need to have a way to do it as well, and maybe even be able to put um five to seven more seats on that board of governors, and those are elected by the people.
Kind of controlling the forklift of the economy just a little bit. There's also something called the reserve requirement. This is how they regulate banks. They go, look, you can't run out of money. They did that in, Mary Poppins. There was a run on the bank. Everybody wanted their topping.
There's something wrong. The bank won't give someone their money. Well, I'm going to get mine. Come along, young man.
Stop all payments. Stop all payments.
So we can't let that happen. So you have to have a certain amount in there. And if you can't have that amount, you need money really quick. You can borrow from each other. And that is called the federal funds rate. They control that interest rate as well, the rate that banks can lend money from each other. So both of these are forklift buttons on the economy in order to contrast it and to expand it. Now, it's important to kind of put this distinction down again. They are independent. They're a government agency, but they're not beholden to anybody. Congress can't tell them what to do. The president can't tell them what to do. Congress can investigate, and the chairman of the Fed might be called to Congress in some type of investigation, but they are supposed to be free from that type of influence so they can concentrate on strengthening the economy. Now, like we previously mentioned, the actual banking in the Federal Reserve System occurs at these 12 Federal Regional Reserve Banks, which are owned by bankers.
Okay, guys, see, and you do see how Congress can investigate. Well, Congress has enough job on it anyway, okay? And that position of power, that was made like that specifically for the bankers' interest, the controlling interest in it, because they wanted that freedom for that person, so they can do what they want to do. Basically, it's like a kingship.
They are the ones in charge of printing the money. All of the transactions, checks and credit, everything gets put through that reserve system where everything is cleared for a final approval. They also catch counterfeiters, and they also, like we said, lend regular banks their money. So in a sense, like we said before, we'll say it again, they are bankers' banks. Now, I said there were three different parts of the Federal Reserve System. We've talked about the board of directors, we've talked about the actual district banks, and now it gets complicated because there's something that's called the Federal Open Market Committee. Federal Open Market Committee. And this is a institution, a committee, which is run by 12 individuals. And they do something very important. They have actually much more power to actually determine what the actual money supply is. And this is going to go way over my head, so I'll keep it very simple. But basically, they decide how much debt, government debt, they should buy or sell. And by having the ability to do that, if they decide to, for instance, sell lots and lots of debt, then they're getting rid of money. That's going to limit the monetary supply, and that's going to create a lowering of inflation if that's a problem. But if it's a very slow economy, they're going to buy lots of debt. That's going to put more money out into the economy, and that's going to hopefully result in employment and a stronger economy. Now, they meet 8 times a year. It's really important when they meet because everybody's listening. Wall Street is listening, for instance. And this is where it gets maybe a little conspiratorial because you would think, who's on that board, that committee? That's really important. How do you get on there? I want one of those jobs. Well, if you want to be on the Federal Open Market Committee, you either have to be on the board of governors of the feds. There's supposed to be 7 individuals appointed by the president, but right now there's only 5. So there are actually only 10 members that are in the Federal Open Market Committee. The 5 board of directors and then 5 heads of Federal Reserve banks. I know I said there's 12, so they rotate them, but hold on.
And so you see, it's all federal, okay? It's all big government. And the only way to regulate big government is with little government. States' rights, okay? States' rights. So we must do this. This is something that needs to happen so that these people aren't corrupt and that it is like an investigation unit and they make sure that there isn't corruption going on in the markets, that the markets can't be controlled and manipulated by people.
Hold on, they don't rotate all 5. One of them gets a permanent spot on this committee, and that would be the president of the Federal Reserve Bank in New York, because it's said that they're so powerful because of Wall Street. Wall Street needs a larger role, so they have a permanent role. So you have at least 5 bankers, and then you have 5 members of the board of directors. You would hope that they would be some maybe public advocates on there, and sometimes there are, but sometimes there's some bankers too. So at the end of the day, even though this is a government-created institution, we have to kind of boil it down to the fact that when they do what's called quantitative easing, that's what it's called when this Federal Open Market Committee kind of regulates the monetary supply through dealing with buying and selling debt. I bit my tongue, that's so complicated. But basically it's bankers doing that. So if you're confused, I'm probably a little bit confused as well. But if you get the basics down, that the feds regulate the monetary system, you understand the concept of interest rates, and maybe you even get the Federal Open Market Committee under your belt, you'd be a pretty smart cookie. How about that? So let's investigate a few criticisms of the feds, and you can leave it down in the comments below, because I know, there's people, they have tinfoil hats on fire when you talk about the Federal Reserve Act. But I'm not going to get into that because I just do the teaching on the YouTube. You can leave it in the comments. So let's check out a couple critiques of the Federal Reserve System. So interestingly enough, when this was actually passed, people that were against banks really wanted it because it was seen as a way to rein the banks in, to keep them under control, and to keep the economy legitimately strong and not under the whims of bankers and Wall Street elites. The people that were pro-bank wanted nothing to do with the feds, but obviously the system has evolved, and in a sense it's kind of flipped around. People that are against the banks sometimes are against the feds because they believe it's a banking cartel. It's controlled by banks for the benefit of the elite, of the wealthy, of the upper class. There's also a constitutional argument. Certainly in Article 1, Congress has the ability in Section 8 to coin money and to regulate the value thereof. But in terms of regulating interest rates and where the
And see, therein lies the problem. It is actually unconstitutional. See, America should be able to make it and print its own money. And that is the problem with it being privatized and privately owned. The solution I offered earlier is a way to kind of get in between the people that privately own it to make sure that their interests are for the good of the country and not for corruption and money and such like that. This is a way to really buckle down on them and make sure that everything is doing the way it is supposed to be done. And I mean, what can you say? No government is perfect, guys. And to be honest, I mean, what else can we do as a nation? If you have any ideas on how to, fix it, that would be good. But just eliminating it completely is not an option. The economy in the country would spiral into haywire and everything would be crazy, okay? But you really have to know what you're talking about when it comes to this stuff. And I'm no expert, but I think that that idea that I just spun gives more power back to the states instead of it all being federal. So that way the states can say, hey, you guys aren't doing right, and we have our representatives in here too, and you need to be doing this, and and they'll probably argue back and forth and stuff like that, and it may slow things down a little bit, but with a little bit of patience and time, that's a good thing, so that you get a good, healthy argument and the right thing ends up happening. So, the next thing I wanted to show you was who are the owners of the Federal Reserve banks. So before we start, this is going to be about the creature from Jekyll Island. This is a book about the Federal Reserve.
Hello, America, and welcome to Friday. Tonight is a special show. I mean, every time we do a Friday show, it's always like, hey, let's talk about something really depressing where we all want to hang ourselves. Tonight, it's the Fed. Oh, it's going to be spooky. During the financial crisis, most Americans have heard a lot about the Federal Reserve, but most Americans don't know anything about it, how it works, what it is, who even runs it, or how it's run. We know that it buys our debt, it sets up interest rates, it has a lot to do with the economic well-being of our nation. Wouldn't you say? Where did it come from? Tonight is part of our E4 focus this year. We're going to delve into E2 and get educated on the Fed. G. Edward Griffin, he is the author of this book, and if one more person hands me this book, I'm going to snap, because I get this from so many. I go out and people are like, have you read this book? Yes, I have. May I recommend, have you read this book? If not, read it. It is The Creature from Jekyll Island. It is a fascinating book on the Fed. The author is one of our guests tonight. We're going to start at the beginning. We're going to talk a little bit about what they're doing now, but I want you to know we're just going to start at the beginning, and really, we're going to give the history of the Fed as told by the Fed. The happy tale on their own website. Are you ready for this? It's great. Here we are. Here it is. Watch this. Quote on their website. After Alexander Hamilton spearheaded a movement advocating the creation of a central bank, the first bank of the United States was established in 1791. You see how great this is? The Fed was started by a founding father. No, it wasn't. No. The first bank isn't the Fed. So what does that have to do with anything? Well, nothing. But they just wanted to throw a founding father's name in there. The bank's charter ran for about 20 years. And because it took about 20 years before Americans realized, hey, that Bank of America thing, that's not working out. They've got way too much power and influence, just like all the other founders said. A proposal to renew it failed. Now back to the happy story from the Fed's website. Quote, the situation deteriorated to such an extent that in 1860, a bill to charter a second bank of the United States was introduced in Congress. The second bank was very much like the first, except bigger, about 3.5 times bigger. It's always that way, isn't it? Anyway, the charter also lasted about 20 years before people went, what are we doing? Americans realized that it wielded too much power and influence, and the proposal to renew it also failed. Then, according to the Fed's website, they got rid of that nasty charter thing in the will of the people. Quote, in 1907, a severe financial panic jolted Wall Street and forced several banks into failure. Many Americans thought their banking structure was sadly out of date and needed major reform. The first draft of the Federal Reserve Act was called the Aldrich Bill because, well, the guy who wrote it was named Aldrich, and it failed. President Taft refused to support it, and you remember he was so fat they had to have a special bathtub for him. Then it underwent some surgery and a readmission as the Glass-Owen Bill. And
Good old Beck. You can always count on good old Beck to serve you up a dish of the truth, whether you like it or not. Taft was so fat, had to put a bathtub in there for him. That's probably the truth.
of course, it got a signature from progressive Woodrow Wilson in 1913. Well, that's the Fed's story. Bill was introduced in 1907, and in 1913, it finally came to be. Isn't everything great in sunshine and lollipop world? The Federal Reserve Act wasn't drafted in Congress. It was drafted on a private island off the coast of Georgia in 1910. Here is the island, Jekyll Island. And it was drafted under great secrecy. Jekyll Island was the retreat for billionaires like William Rockefeller and J.P. Morgan. And in 1910, Senator Nelson Aldrich, the Republican whip in the Senate and the chair of the National Monetary Commission, sent his private railroad car to the New Jersey Railroad Station, where he and 5 other men were instructed to come one at a time and everybody pretend they just didn't know each other. Aldrich, who is the guy, remember, he wrote the original bill. He was a business associate of J.P. Morgan. Oh, and the father-in-law to John D. Rockefeller, Jr. So there's no special interest happening there. There was also Abram Piatt Andrew, Assistant Secretary of the Treasury, and Frank Vanderlip, representing William Rockefeller, Henry Davidson and Benjamin Strong with J.P. Morgan, and Paul Warburg. He was a partner at Kuhn, Loeb and Company. He was representing the Rothschild banking family. Oh, he's going to talk about the Rothschilds now. He actually is an interesting character. If you ever saw Little Orphan Annie, Daddy Warbucks was named after Warburg. These are the men that represented 1/4 of the entire wealth of the world. You think we got a problem with wealth now? Those guys, 1/4 of all of the money in the world. The Morgans, the Rockefellers.
And now we're in a similar position where BlackRock, and if you watched, I believe it's episode 15 or 14, 15, or 16 of the Jordan Bumgarner show, not the Jbizzle show, because the Jbizzle show is the new show, then you see that BlackRock owns 1/4 of what is considered to be the world's wealth. But in general, there's a lot more to talk about what people show on for their wealth and how much wealth there really is in the world that is hidden and hoarded away. Now, we're going to talk about some of that too in some later episodes. I'm going to show you some things that are hidden from you.
Rockefellers, Warburgs, and Rothschilds, all in one room. Yeah, but when do they start sacrificing chickens? Well, it doesn't happen. That I'll tell you. These guys were all competitors. According to G. Edward Griffin, who we'll talk to in a minute, they all had come together to form a banking cartel so they didn't have to compete against each other. He says it was like an oil cartel or a sugar cartel, but this cartel actually went into partnership with the government. I mean, how great is that, huh? It's kind of like the drug cartels in Mexico. Wait, I didn't say that out loud, did I? So for more than a week, these men sat around there. And they sat around this big table and they hammered out all the details of what became the Federal Reserve System with 5 objectives. How many of these do you agree with? 1, to stop the growing competition from the nation's newer banks. That doesn't sound good. 2, to obtain a franchise to create money out of nothing for the purpose of lending. That one really doesn't sound good either. 3, to get control of the reserves of all of the banks so the reckless ones wouldn't be exposed to currency drains or bank runs. Oh, that's the charity part. Golly gee, Beef, thank you so much. Then, to shift the loss.
See, and in reality, that's the play. The whole thing's the play, but they wanted to make it, mix that up in there so that they could put their little twist on it and be like, oh, we're helping. No, but we're really seizing power.
From the bank owners to the taxpayers. It just gets better and better for you and me, doesn't it? No. Again, the answer is no. And then finally, to convince Congress that the purpose was to protect the public. Well, they started the Federal Reserve with no money, just a checkbook. The government could go to the Fed and obtain instant.
So do you understand that? The debt was shifted from the bankers of the USA to the individual. Hence, your social security number and social security card ID, your birth certificate, and all those things. Once you have one of those, you literally become indebted to the U.S. debt, hence in control of that debt, or we owe that debt to the Federal Reserve. So basically, it's like that in every country. The bank owns the country, and they're not regulated, which is, it's bullshit. It's bullshit, guys. It's bullshit, and the bullshit has to stop.
Money without having to consult the taxpayer. What a country! Money created out of nothing and then given to the government. It's loaned by the banks to you and me, and then we pay interest on it, and it goes to them. Interest on nothing. Again, the Fed is nothing more than a cartel like OPEC, except it's a money cartel. And this cartel that brought the federal government into a partnership where you and I have to answer to it. And it's only to enforce the rules of the cartel, to bring those into agreement with the federal laws to protect you. It operates under the protection of the federal government, and the government has virtually given a monopoly to create the nation's money supply. There are no elected officials. There's virtually no accountability to anyone. The president doesn't get to say, I'm going to name Glenn Beck as the head of the Fed, which, oh, please. Sarah, when you're in, I'm available. Oh, did I say that one out loud too? Can't do that. The Fed gives the president a list to choose from. Really? Well, thank you, Chairman Mao. The Fed is privately owned, but by whom? Good question. No one knows. We can't open their books, and we don't know who owns them. Really? Now, here's an interesting spin from the Federal Reserve Board website. Although they're set up like private corporations and member banks hold their stock, the Federal Reserve banks owe their existence to an act of Congress and have a mandate to serve the public. Oh, therefore, they're not really private companies, but rather owned by the citizens of the United States.
Guys, there you have it. No one really knows who owns the Fed. That's the problem. That's why I said there should be an elected representative from each state, and that the Federal Reserve books should be opened. They should be investigated for corruption so that no insider trading and special interest can be done. And also, those people should have something that goes against them, where if they're being bought and corrupted, that they can clamp down on them, so that it's more of a democratic monetary policy. Because right now it's a privatized monetary policy, and America is treated like a corporation that pays debt to a private bank. And that's who you owe. You owe. I owe. Every one of us owes hundreds of thousands of dollars that we didn't spend. We didn't spend. No, we didn't. But because we are U.S. citizens, we owe that debt because those people who we elected and represented, we owe that debt because all that crap happened hundreds of years ago, and they took advantage of the Great Depression financial market crash thingy there, is what they did. Okay? It is a monopoly. BlackRock is a monopoly. And all should be investigated. This has been the Jordan Bumgarner Show. Well, now the Jbizzle Show. Forgive me, guys. I'm getting used to saying which is which. America, patriots. Come on, y'all. Stand up. Organize. Go to your community buildings, your church buildings. If you're a patriot, speak out. Share this. People need to know this. You don't understand why you owe that debt? Well, the people we owe the debt to won't show us the books on why we owe the debt. Now, are you going to pay a debt to somebody who won't tell you what you owe the debt for? Huh? They can't show you that you did this, and this, and this is why you owe this debt? They can't do that. You can't do that. So, I, Jordan Lindsay Bumgarner, say that I've made my points this show. There must be representatives from each state, and there must be something also that locks those people in too, so that there's eyes on each one, and then when that shit starts, that corruption, we get it. And like if something starts going funky, we'll know about it because we elected those representatives to do that. We sent them in there to do that. Okay? You wanted to fix? That's your fix. It's been the Jbizzle Show, episode 2. God bless you. Jesus loves you. Open them books.